It's my privilege now to bring up someone, a member of the Government Business Executive Forum Executive Committee. And when you produce a conference like this, again, you think of Nokia, Verizon, you think of a loco, okay, they're a sponsor, but behind that sponsor is people who make decisions. And for 8 years, Mike Maiorana and his team has made a decision to be here. And I know that, Mike, I'm going to invite you, ask you to come up, but Mike's in the business of communications for government. You all have his biography on what he does. He's Senior Vice President of Public Sector for Verizon. Mike's passionate about the agendas of government. When you talk to him about communications, he'll talk about law enforcement, national defense, intelligence, service delivery, and it has been a privilege to work with him, both in the GBEF and on CES Government. Please welcome to the stage, Mike Maiorana. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, Don. Not yet? Now it is. All right. They have like a 5-second delay on me. They're worried about what I'm going to say, maybe. All kidding aside, it's been a terrific conference so far. I commented to Don last night when I saw him about the energy and the participation and the engagement from industry as well as our trusted government partners. At Verizon, we really understand the important mission that our government agencies need to deliver to our country, and we work very hard to do that every day. Thousands of people at Verizon wake up and go to bed every day consumed with delivering capabilities to the government to allow you to serve that mission. We're also very highly dependent on partnerships. We extend out to industry, large business, small business, tech companies, to help enable creative solutions to help the government solve its largest problems. At Verizon, we've got a strong commitment to our military, a strong commitment to our veteran population. We're extremely active in veteran hiring initiatives. We're extremely active with the VA, with medicine, telehealth in particular, delivering capabilities via technology to allow our veterans to get the best health care they can receive and that they certainly deserve. We're also very passionate about the work that we do with the USO. It's a higher calling to be in the role that I'm in, to serve the mission, to help our government partners elevate their capabilities to their constituents, and we take that on very serious. We've got interesting and exciting new technologies. We had practically standing room only in the 5G breakout session yesterday. We're very interested in ideating with industry and our government partners to ensure that we're delivering appropriate and meaningful use cases with this new technology, 5G, edge compute, intelligent edge network, delivering reliability, security, and the availability that you need to do your work. So with that said, I want to let you know that it's a privilege for me, and I know a privilege for you, to have our next speaker come up to say a few words. His name is General John Kelly. He's a true American patriot.
United States Marine Corps decorated 4-star General Commander of SOUTHCOM.
Anything you have read negative about Guantanamo Bay is wrong, and it has been delivered to you by a very agenda-driven press. I don't know why, but I know what goes on down there. I know what has gone on down there.
Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security.
Part of the problem is we are a very overly medicated society. Huge amounts of opioids are prescribed legally for things that in the past would probably not receive that level of medications.
Chief of Staff to the President of the United States.
Is anyone here a Gold Star parent or sibling? Does anyone here know a Gold Star parent or sibling? Okay, you get the question.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage a great American leader and patriot, General John Kelly.
No.
Thanks, Jim. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much. Undeserved, but thank you very much. You know, I'll start by answering a couple of questions that always come up The first one is always, how did you end up in the United States Marine Corps, and why did you serve for 45 years? And the answer to that is, back in the olden days, most of you are too young to remember this, but back in the olden days, we had this thing called a draft. So I didn't have much, didn't have much of a choice. And when I went down to take my draft physical, when I got my notification, I went down to take my draft physical. My part of Boston, in the neighborhoods, everyone served. Very working class background. Everyone served. Every man in my life was a veteran of World War II or Korea. Just everyone served. Other parts of America, college campuses, not so much. But anyways, I went down to take my draft physical, and at the end of it, you spend most of the day either naked or in your underwear, which was weird back, with 500 other guys. Really weird. But at the end of it, you sit down with a medical professional, and they tell you whether you're qualified or not to be in the armed forces. So I sat down, and the fellow said to me, well, you're not qualified to serve in the armed forces. And I was stunned, because I was in pretty good shape. And I said, well, what's the deal? And they said, one, you have bone spurs, and I'd never heard of those before. And I didn't know I had them, and I still don't know if I have them. But bone spurs, and your corrected vision is 20/20, but uncorrected is way outside the parameters, so you can't serve. And I said, is there anything I can do to appeal this? And he said, you want to go in the Army? And I said, well, no, I don't want to go in the Army. I want to go in the Marine Corps. But he then said, and the Army's great, but it wasn't for me. And so he just said, okay, and found me qualified. So that's how I started. My initial commitment was for 2 years, but I found that not only was I changed by the experience of being a United States Marine or serving in uniform to protect our country, but the men and women I served with were just absolutely the best people. The best people. And as Americans, what I'm about to say should concern you, us as a society, that right now, 75% of American youth cannot join the U.S. military if they wanted to. They're not qualified. 75% of American youth cannot, and of the 25% or so, a very small percentage of those folks come in for whatever reason motivates them to do it. And most of them only stay 4 years, and you know a lot of them. A lot of you out there fall into this category. But it does something really to change your life in the way you look at our America. And you're exposed to people you've never been exposed to before, colors and religions and genders. And you just come out of that experience looking at America and American society very differently. That's why I think, in my view, an awful lot of the shenanigans that are going on, that's a Joe Biden word, a lot of the shenanigans going on who's a good friend, in Washington would be improved if we had more veterans running for Congress, doesn't matter what party they're in, because they do take a different perspective about what America is all about. But anyways, that's how I went in the armed forces. And I stayed, I always said I would stay until it wasn't fun anymore. And it was fun for 45 years, and then I got too old. Stress and strain on the family for sure. 29 moves, cross country, I think 6 times, crossed a couple of oceans a couple of times. The burden on my wife having 3 children, but it was an experience that was unlike anything I could have imagined. And so the next part of it is, how did you get wrapped up with Donald Trump? And so I would tell you, true story, I'm retired now from the Marine Corps, 8 months, watching college football with my wife on a Saturday afternoon. After the election, I get a call, and the guy on the other end of the call is a guy by the name of Reince Priebus. And I'd never heard the name before in my life, who, by the way, is a wonderful guy, good friend, but he was the first chief of staff. But he said, I'm Reince Priebus, and I said, you're kidding, that's not really a name, is it? And he said, yeah, it's my name. In any event, he said, the president-elect would like you to consider coming into the government. And I said, you're serious? And he said, I am serious. We're up in Bedminster, New Jersey. I'm in Virginia. And we'll send an airplane for you right away and come up here and talk to the president-elect. And I said, well, I'm not a send an airplane for you kind of guy, so if you're serious, I'll drive up tomorrow. And then Vice President-elect Pence got on the phone and said, if you don't believe him, Mike Pence is not that unusual a name. I said, okay. And I did drive up the next day and had a brief interview with him, and he talked about a number of jobs, one of which was DHS, and went up a second time a couple of weeks later, and closed the deal, so to speak. But my wife said to me after that phone call, she said, what was that all about? Because she heard one side of the conversation. So I told her, this guy by the name of Runs Previous, and she said, is that really a name? But I said, what do you think? She said, well, if we're nothing else as a family, we're a family of service. And so if they think they need you, and I think they need you, then you ought to go up there and at least consider the thing. So I went to DHS, and I found DHS to be a remarkable organization. Most Americans don't understand it very well, but what I found, it's very similar to DOD in terms of mentality and commitment and to what they do. The difference is DOD plays the away game, as I term it, and DHS plays the home game. And I would actually argue, and Jim Mattis used to go crazy when I would say this, but the vast majority of the DOD budget is paid, is invested to help other countries, to deter countries and to help other countries, NATO, Asia, whatever. And frankly, with the exception of Russia as an existential threat with their nuclear weapons, an awful lot of that money is, as I say, not for our own defense, but for the defense of our friends and allies overseas, which is a good thing, don't get me wrong. But as I looked at DHS and the incredibly important job it does, to me it's underfunded, but the people were, to me, remarkable. I had no idea of their cyber and cyber defense capability. I had no idea what the CVP people did. Really, really remarkable people and doing a really, really effective job. And most Americans don't really have much of an appreciation for them. I know some of you have DHF background, do business with DHS. It's a hell of an organization. And as I say, it's an organization, with this president, it's almost exclusively about immigration. It shouldn't be, because that's only one small portion of what DHS does. So that's how I get wrapped up with the Trump administration. What did I find as I worked in Washington, particularly after I left the armed forces, because it's two different worlds. When you deal with the United States Congress and you're in the armed forces, there is a lot of bipartisanship. There may be disagreements between the Republicans and the Democrats about how many aircraft carriers we need, but never a disagreement as to whether we need aircraft carriers or the size of the Army, but never any disagreement on whether we need an Army. Quite bipartisan, still is today, even in the situation up there. The defense, or the press that covers the Defense Department and the military, they don't oftentimes write the story you want to read, but they are very good at what they do. They're, to me, very responsible. They dedicate their lives in a lot of ways. Take people like Barbara Starr. They've been doing this for 40 years. They know the lingo. They know what's going on. It was a very different world when I joined DHS. Highly partisan committees on both sides of the hill that I dealt with, unreasonably so in many ways. And then the press, particularly when I went to the White House, I love the press. The press is absolutely essential to our country. It's absolutely essential for our democracy, but the press has taken sides. And I know Mr. Trump has not made it any better, but they've taken sides. They're agenda-driven, and I don't feel as that they're quite as responsible journalists as the DOD military coverage is. That's unfortunate, because that forces you as Americans, I think. You cannot go to one news source and understand what's going on in the country. If you go to Fox News and look at Fox News, you'll be just as skewed in your understanding of what's going on in the world and the country than if you watch MSNBC every day. You've got to find ways, and that usually means going to multiple news sources and listening to multiple people talk, if you really want to understand what's going on in Washington and in the country. The threats against our country are real. I'd start with some of these really domestic threats, the DHS threats, if you will. The southwest border is in crisis. We do need to do better down there, working with good allies and partners like Mexico, like the Central American republics. We can stop illegal immigration to a large degree if we were to work with those countries better than we have in the last, say, 20 years. And remember, their problems in those countries, the murder rates, the problems in those countries relative to crime and whatnot, is a direct result it's our fault. It's a direct result of our drug consumption. The amount of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines that our Americans consume, whether they're addicted or do it recreationally, is killing those countries to our south. And if we were to get some kind of a handle on this drug problem we have, and we don't have it, and it's critical in our society, then those countries will continue, people in those countries will continue to leave and try to get here where it's safer and there's some economic opportunity. But the southwest border is in crisis, and there's ways to deal with that crisis, and that means dealing with the countries to the south. And they've been very cooperative in spite of an awful lot of pretty rough rhetoric against them. The opioid crisis is just nuts how many people in our country are dying every year. And the death rate is, I think last year was about 80,000 from hard drugs. And you can't even count the number of people who are struggling with drug addiction and whatnot. So that's another thing that we need to get our arms around. And then there's the countries out there. We talked about China, or we talked about China a little while ago. Chinese are brilliant in many, many ways. They've been on a 50-plus year, step-by-step, very, very controlled process of going from being almost economically irrelevant and to a large degree militarily irrelevant to what you heard up here just a few minutes ago, to where they rival us militarily and they surpass us in some respects from an economic point of view. And they've done it because they have this 50-plus year cycle. In our country, the cycle is 2 years. Every election. We live from election to election to election. The chart that was shown up there where the basis, the key points in our country for innovation, whether there's 6 or 7 of them, Boston, New York, Seattle, a couple of things like that. And then the next chart is where DOD is investing its money, right, and who they're working with. That comes as a direct result of Congress taking care of their constituents, taking care of their districts. So an awful lot of inefficiency is built into the DOD budget because it has to react to some senior member of Congress who wants some little factory or some little investment, or not investment, but research to get some money. And it builds an awful lot of inefficiency into it. Sometimes they even tell us to buy weapons we don't want anymore. The Army a few years ago was told they had to buy a bunch of tanks. They said, we'll get plenty of tanks. Yeah, but you got to buy more because the factory's going to close. So this builds, but the Chinese are very, very smart in what they do. They've stolen immense, as it was addressed up here, immense amounts of intellectual property. They do it in various ways. If you're a business and you want to do business there, they want you to share what you know. They then steal it and push you out of the country 2, 3, 4 years later. The other thing, they've got a very, very innovative, send a lot of students to the United States. There's a great article in this week's Economist magazine about this. It almost has it right. But they send huge numbers of students here, 300,000+, and they go to some of our best universities, and the expectation is they go and get a degree, say from MIT, then get a master's degree from, I don't know, Stanford, and then work here and get a trip back to China every summer. And they do the same thing over. They're very, very smart in what they do. They are a real threat. Their military is very high tech. The good news is, though, from a war point of view, the Chinese are very calculating in what they do, and every move is thought through for 2 or 3 or 4 moves down the line. That's very different than, say, the recklessness that we see out of Putin in Russia. The good news is Russia's military is not very good anymore because, I mean, they still have 1,000+ nuclear weapons aimed at us. But their conventional military capability has been weakened because of their economy. I think their economy is something like is smaller than Italy's economy. And there's a number of other things that have caused them to really lose an edge in terms of their military. But they're still out there creating mischief. And as I say, Mr. Putin is bound and determined to reestablish Russia in the same way, not reestablish the Soviet Union, but reestablish his country as the number one hegemon or the number one superpower and push us off the edge. It's not going to happen, but that's what he's bound and determined to do. We have the problem with Iran. It is a real problem. Militarily, I mean, it would be a hell of a war, don't get me wrong, and a lot of Americans would get hurt, and but they're very good in the other 2 things they do well, and that is cyber and the terrorism thing. They've got proxies everywhere, Latin America, everywhere. and all they have to do is pull the trigger and or tell them to do something, and they're off to the races. This thing isn't over yet. I can't imagine we won't see a considerable cyber effort of some type, probably through a proxy directed to make their case here. The good news is our defenses are very, very good, and we don't use offensive cyber very much. But the point is that I don't think this thing with Iran is over, and it'll go tit for tat for a while, and I just hope it just doesn't get out of control. The final, North Korea, what do you say about him? I think this president's been pretty firm. You're not going to get an ICBM, which they essentially almost have, and you're not going to get a deliverable nuclear weapon. They have nuclear weapons, but it's real hard to shoot an ICBM and have that, as many of you know better than I do, and have that device survive through the atmosphere from space and explode. So, but the president has said pretty forcefully that it's not going to happen. But I do not believe, and I think the president was hoping, and we all hope, but he is not going to give up his nuclear weapons. He's irrelevant if he gives up his nuclear weapons. No one would care about him and his country. And his country, by the way, is a gulag. What he does to his people every day is simply horrific. And we all should pray to God that someday that whole thing is taken care of so that their people don't suffer as much. And then I'll end with the war on terror. You know, the president and others say an awful lot about the endless wars and all that. And to a degree, he's right. The problem is that if we don't keep pressure on the jihadists where they are in the world, then they will, I mean, they're not going to surrender. If we wanted to surrender, there's no one to surrender to. If we come home, that just gives them basis of operation to where they can come and hurt us again. Because of DHS and FBI and CIA, we have not had a threat against our country like 9/11 happened since 9/11, but it's not for their lack of trying. The good news is we get the jump on them and kill them before they can come, whether they're in Syria or anywhere else. What we don't want is to let this pressure up. And remember, the vast majority in these places, North Africa, Afghanistan even, Iraq, the vast majority of the people fighting and dying in those countries are not U.S. military people. Yes, we lose some. I think we lost 16 in Syria in the last 5 years. The people that were doing all the fighting, the Kurds, our friends, lost 11,000. So working by, with, and through these host country militaries keeps the pressure on at a relatively low cost to the United States. Every death is, I can tell you, awful, and every death is important, but we in the military know the risks. That's why we're there, and we can take care of ourselves. The point is that if we let up on these guys and give them free rein in countries, they will continue and eventually be successful in coming at us. The Super Bowl for them right now, though, the Stanley Cup, if you're a hockey fan, is knocking down one of our big airliners over the Atlantic or while it's flying. They'd love to get their hands on a nuclear weapon. Knock wood, they never do. But they're going to be out there, and this will go on I believe for generations. And the best thing we can do is using our law enforcement, our military, and our intel professionals, keep them at bay. And I could go on and on and on about some of the threats that were real, almost, and didn't happen because we were able to send them to hell with a hellfire. And this should make you feel good, but so far we've been 100% successful. That statistically won't last. So I think with that, I think the next step is someone's going to come up, I think Mike, and we'll have a chat up here, I think.
Yes, sir. Thank you, General Kelly. It's been a privilege to meet you today and spend time with you. Off the agenda, Don Upson, myself and others decided to take the opportunity today. We've got a special guest in the room. This woman is a 40-year plus dedicated leader in regards to supporting our military and our military families. Elaine Rogers is the president and CEO of the Washington, D.C. Metro Baltimore USO. I'd like to bring Elaine up and give her, and all right. Now, $5,000 to
Nice.
your USO. Now, you can't convert this into chips and try to make it 10. You can't double it here, but we are privileged to work so closely with you, and your work means so much for our active military and their families. So, Elaine, thank you so much.
I love you guys. So much. Wow. I'm just going to, especially having General Kelly here, it's always an honor to be with you. But we're going to put this, I just found out about this. I didn't know. I'm so excited. But we're going to put this check towards opening our newest USO facility, which will be opening in about 2 months at Quantico. Our first one.
Marine
on
base.
the Marine
All right.
All right.
That's where that's going to go.
Invite them to the opening.
I already
Oh,
did.
okay.
I said, will you come?
I'll come.
Okay.
Can't say no to you.
5,000 and Kelly's going to be there.
Thank you.
But I also know there's going to be a big event February. Is it 2nd? With
Sounds good.
GBEF.
Yes.
Well, GBEF. No, you should know.
Oh, this is the bourbon thing?
Yes.
Oh, it's only 8 o'clock in the morning.
I want to know about this bourbon thing.
Some of us are ready. But you all are going to have a big.
5 o'clock somewhere.
Yes, exactly. You're going to have a big bourbon event, and I hope that all of you will be attending that. And I hope we get invited to that.
And take the Uber home.
Yes,
Yeah.
I plan to. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.